Okay, so here we go. I wanted to give a first kind of class online. As I said to you in the email, I'm really not sure yet how we're going to go about getting through this semester. I would strongly advise, if you can, that you look at the video on our English web, whatever, the Facebook page for the department. Uh, Daniel Feldman spoke to our undergraduates, our first year students this morning, and instead of me going over what he said, which even though most of you are graduate students, it's still appropriate. Instead of me going over everything that he said, just look at it. It's really incredible and it's worth sharing with people. So as I said, I'm not really sure how we're going to go about doing this, but I thought at least for this time, and I think this is probably going to make sense for us, we'll do what's called asynchronic instruction, meaning I'll spend a half hour, I think now, talking about some of the issues we spoke about last time. Last time we spoke about different kinds of education. So I'll do that, and then I think maybe I'll provide another half-hour lecture tomorrow as an introduction to the poetry that we're reading, and then we'll meet, I think, on Wednesday for, I don't know, that part I'm not really sure yet about how that's going to go. Since everybody in the group is really kind of on the same page, it might be easier for us than in some other contexts. We just have to see how it works. That the gist of what Daniel Feldman said is you have to do what works, and we're going to do our best to do what works, knowing fully well that we're not going to have the same kind of goals and aspirations that we had before this world historical crisis, which is really what it is. So we will accommodate. One of the things that I spoke about in some other context, a video that I made on YouTube, just about leadership and responsibility during this time. Is that we're all actually in this together. We're not, it's not like you're coming from someplace which is completely frantic and hectic and I'm sitting in this context which is, completely calm and removed, as you'll see probably, because my kids will probably interrupt during the course of this thing. And that's really what we expect. We expect, this is interrupted learning. But having said that, in May, actually, Milton himself lived through many historical traumas, personal traumas, revolution, failed revolution, blindness, plague, illness, which is to kind of go back on what we said, some of the things we talked about last time, and we really developed it very extensively theoretically, that our job in understanding Milton or translating Milton into our current language is simultaneously going back into the past and being faithful to what he said and then bringing it out, in bringing it to us. And I mentioned to you last time, this is like a controversial way of reading now, because the reader is always kind of, the critical reader today is always standing on the outside, describing the text and saying that, we know more than the author does. And we have this really radical way of learning right now, that is, Milton knows more than we do. It's the way people studied for hundreds of years, and that just kind of went out of fashion. Anyway, I don't think Milton is less urgent today, as some people might say off the top of their head. I think reading literature is now more urgent, because we're really in the situation where we don't know what's going on in the world. And these existential issues that are addressed in literature are now real. We can't just put them off behind whatever other workday concerns we have, because our routines have been disrupted so radically. And we can't even hide in our Facebook or Twitter profiles, because that's all there is now, and rightfully so. So I think I really do think that Milton will speak to us. And I think even though we're not, here's the really radical statement, even though we're not going to achieve what we might have achieved had we all been together, I think there, in some ways, which are not quantitative, we will, if we all make ourselves present, we will actually achieve more. And that is actually, I am going to ask this of you. I am going to ask you to be diligent and be prepared for whatever meeting that we have. It's going to require more this time, because when you come into class, there's a kind of dynamic or energy that is coming from the class itself. That doesn't, you'll see Zoom is a decent platform, but that doesn't really exist in the same way as for us now. So I think part of the our imperative will be coming from that idea that we need to read Milton now. That's, I think, even more important to say, is not that, oh, now Milton, Milton was irrelevant and now he's relevant. I think we need to read him now. Wordsworth in the 18th century, whatever he wrote, Wordsworth, you probably know better than I do, around the beginning of the 19th century, wrote, "Oh, Milton, if thou wert alive at this hour," meaning Wordsworth looks back at Milton and says, if you were only alive today and we had your inspiration. And Wordsworth, by "if you were alive at this hour," is really kind of, in a way, bringing Milton to life, even as he's acknowledging that he's dead. So that's also what we're going to be doing with Milton, make Milton alive for this hour. And I have very, very high expectations that if we do make ourselves present, we'll get a lot out of it. Just before we go over some material, let's start at 4:00 on Wednesday, good time. And we'll all we'll take at least 15 minutes to get accustomed to Zoom. I will send you an invitation. We will spend 10 or 15 minutes in class, if you haven't already done that, figuring out how it works, and any other kind of practical issues that come up. And I definitely want to say, right, one of the things that I'm certainly open to doing is having online meetings with students. If that's 1 or 2 or 5, but primarily, if any one of you feels like you need to talk or want to talk, I'm available. We are now much more clearly part of a community than we ever were before. And we should take advantage of that. And not only take advantage of it, we should cultivate it. Okay, fine. So I want to spend, I don't know how much time I've already spent on this, but I want to spend some time now on talking about reading history, or reading Renaissance as, Renaissance as a kind of revolution in reading. And last time, 2 weeks ago, just to remind you, we spoke about the way in which Bacon was rebelling against what he thought was a form of learning based almost entirely on cultural constructs and structures and language, and had fallen completely away from what for Bacon matters most, the material. We mentioned for Bacon, he has this saying that he wants experience to learn her letters. It's almost as if he's saying he wants language not to emerge from an ideal realm, but language to emerge from the empirical realm itself. We also remember, just as I'm saying this, right, remember the way in which Bacon reworks Plato's cave, and where for Plato, getting out of the cave means escaping to the ideal. In Bacon, the movement is not up, but the movement is down, right? Experience will learn her letters. Experience kind of pushes up from the bottom. That's the basic fundament of truth. And as we said last time, Bacon creates the context in which scientific methodology thrived. But in his emphasis on observation in the empirical world, he really sets up the possibility for that. So we said Bacon is a revolution in reading. You're reading improperly. As we said, this is what many, many authors in our period are doing. We kept on coming back to Spencer, whose whole first book of the Fairy Queen seems to be about how people misread, that they judge only by appearances and don't see beyond those appearances. So here also Bacon is saying you're looking at things improperly. We also mentioned Fox's Book of Martyrs, a way of rereading history, or a kind of, this is a revolution in reading, not that you've been reading improperly, but this is the way now as English people you have to read. That is by telling the history of Mary's reign, that is the Catholic Queen's reign, in a particular way. Fox, through his many editions of the Book of Martyrs, was creating a history and identity for the modern English person. As we said, the Catholic past is a past of persecution, and we saw some of the description, or we saw the introduction of the Book of Martyrs, where Fox talks about the righteousness and innocence of Protestant Christians. So we have that kind of dichotomy being created as a way of telling a historical narrative. Again, the emergence from that older culture of persecution to this new realm of Protestant liberty. And the two are, one is as important as the other. Okay, so that's also kind of an instruction book on how to read history. I want to skip to Toddle's book, Miscellany, which I'm looking for here. I think I have the ability to show you what I'm looking at. If it's not working, since I don't want to stop in the middle. If it's not working, just check the handout from the last time. It's on page 2. So Toddle was an editor of poetry. And I remember when I was in graduate school and people talked about Toddle's Miscellany, I couldn't understand for the life of me why anybody would care about this very obscure 1557 text, which is really just a collection of poems by poets that we hardly even know anymore. Wyatt and Surrey. Wyatt, an incredibly great poet, but we don't really know them. And you wonder, like, why would anybody care? So why we care is that Toddle is basically creating an audience for poetry. Meaning once there's this translation of classical culture into English culture, then there's also this implicit competition with the past. That is, where now, anybody want to shake? Where now, this is distracting. We English people have simultaneously inherited that classical tradition, but actually are going beyond it. We talked about anxiety of influence, and you see that anxiety of influence, especially in the English 16th century, where there's a tremendous anxiety about Greek and Latin culture. Greek and Latin culture is simultaneously the goal to reach, but also the thing that causes the most anxiety. Meaning, the English wanted to emulate Greeks and the Latins, but they wanted to outdo them as well. The educator, Richard Mulcaster, says, let's see if I can remember this, certainly some undergraduate in the class will remember it. I love Rome, I worship England. Meaning, even though Mulcaster feels this great attraction to Rome, there's an even greater sense of the greatness of England, which of course, when Mulcaster was writing, which I think was about 1580, was entirely justified because England basically had no culture yet. There was no Shakespeare, there was no Milton, there was no Spencer. There was Chaucer a very, very long time ago. But there was also, and this is really what Toddle's doing and why this is important, there was Toddle's Miscellany. That is, he collects these poems. A lot of them are Petrarchan, that is from the Italian source. Wyatt and Surrey both translated Italian poems, Petrarchan poems. And sometimes they translate the same poem. So in that gesture, these poets are looking back, but they're also translating. Again, translating is a major metaphor for us this semester. They're translating that classical culture into the present. And they're saying, look, we also have, this is what Toddle is doing, saying, hey, there is an English literary tradition, and you have to read it and take it into account. People like Mulcaster and Toddle, and even for Sir Philip Sidney, also writing in 1580, they have a tremendous faith in the power of England, because even though they don't have the great poets which we know the Renaissance for, there was still this incredible sense of the confidence that England would produce these great poets. It's kind of an amazing thing that it happened, that two of the greatest poets to have ever lived, Milton, and the greatest poet to ever live, Shakespeare, came out in this period. It's really extraordinary. It's like having Homer and Virgil living at the same time, which is an interesting way of putting it, and true. The problem for Toddle, however, was that he announced this new body of literature, but he has no audience. And part of what he's doing in the Miscellany is creating an audience. And the audience that he creates, we'll see in a second, the audience that he creates is an audience that knows how to read. Here's the Miscellany. That to have written well in verse, yea, and in small parcels, the small parcels being probably sonnets or lyrics and not epics, that to have written well in verse, yea, and in small parcels deserveth great praise. Even here you can see a kind of anxiety. He's saying that the first sentence is already is making a concession, that, yeah, I understand that you think that writing small poems is not a big deal. But he's going to say, well, really it is, because the works of diverse Latins, Italians, and others do prove sufficiently. Meaning Tottle is saying, I'm translating not only from the older Roman culture, but from a contemporary Renaissance Italian culture, where of course the Renaissance began first. And he's saying, I have precedents. Rome produced a great culture. Italy produced a great culture, is producing a great culture, and that's enough for me to license. And they did so with writing small poems, lyrics. Of course, with Italy, there's the reference to Petrarch, and there are lots of Latin poets who write small verses, not Virgil, of course. That our tongue is able in that kind to do as praiseworthy as the rest, again, you feel the anxiety, really, I know it's not, the honorable style of the noble Earl of Surrey and the weightiness of the deep-witted Sir Thomas Wyatt, with several graces and sundry good English writers do show abundantly. If you don't believe it, read Sir Thomas Wyatt. And then he continues, and exhort the unlearned by reading to be more skillful. Great, right? By reading to be more skillful. That is, through reading to become more skillful, or in reading to be more skillful. It's really not really clear what, it seems to be able to say more than one thing at the same time. And I exhort the unlearned by reading to be more skillful, either meaning by reading to become more skillful, or in your reading, probably more likely, to be more, to read better, and to purge that swine-like grossness that maketh the sweet marjoram not to smell to their delight. And I exhort the unlearned by reading to be more skillful and to purge that swine-like grossness. What is Tottle saying to his audience? Don't be pigs, because you're reading like pigs. That swine-like grossness makes the sweet marjoram being the sweet-smelling spice, not to smell to their delight. One more time. So they could get delight from these texts, but they can't. They're reading in a way which makes that impossible. They can't smell properly. They can't sense properly. They can't read properly. And here's another example where we're seeing that this is a revolution in reading, and that the Renaissance is a series of new strategies for reading. Okay, let's take a little break, stretch a little bit. There are a couple of other examples that I gave of changes in reading through translation, which I don't want to get into at the moment. We'll look at, maybe we'll have a chance to go over some of the other things. But in the meantime, we have put on the map revisions and ways of reading that are very, very important to Milton. Now, having had our break, great thing is you can pause me at any time. Having had our break, I want to make a transition from the issue of translation to the issue, translation and reading, to the issue of time. As you know, if you started to do the reading for the Nativity Ode, which I know is a strange poem and not really familiar and very, very religious, one of the things you have to get used to here is even if you're not a 17th century Protestant, which you're not, you can get an enormous amount out of these poems. And one of the what we're seeing in any representation of Christian scenes is a particular representation. Go to a museum, you can go to a museum, let's say the Met in New York, or you can't go there now. Go to a museum and you look at Madonna and Child, and there are a billion of them, right? And you think, oh my God, this is so boring. But it's actually not boring, because each one is a different kind of representation. That's what painters painted them. So whatever they did, they had to paint paintings like this. This is one of the things in their repertoire of things that they painted. So we're interested then in seeing the distinctions between those representations. And we will certainly do with Milton, and see how in everything that he does, he's revising, translating, changing. And his representations will be distinctive. So the Nativity Ode, the full title of the poem is On the Morning of Christ's Nativity. Read that, the whole thing, and not just, and that's the name of the whole poem. Is structured around different conceptions of time. And I think maybe the next lecture that I give, probably tomorrow, and I'll put up for you, there we'll talk more conceptually about different kinds of time. Here, let's just read this poem, How Soon Hath Time, that Milton wrote. Is this a sonnet? Is it? Oh, no, I'm not counting well. It looks like it is. Here Milton is meditating on time. I think he writes this when he's 29 years old, and the kind of underlying theme of the poem is that time is going too fast. Oh, he's not 29, he's 23, right? How soon hath time, the subtle thief of youth, stolen on his wing my 23rd year. What is Milton is here lamenting that time, the subtle thief, time as destroyer, is stolen on his wing my 23rd year. My hasting days fly on with full career, but my late spring no bud or bloom showeth. So his days are flying on, but my late spring no bud or blossom showeth. I mean, here Milton is clearly saying he has nothing to show for it yet. Late spring is not really clear. I think I remember that Milton he matured late physically as a man. In fact, when he was at Christ Church at Oxford, he was called the Lady of Christ Church, which I've never gotten my head around, but maybe because he was just very youthful. But my late spring no bud or blossom showeth. My spring, which was late, my development, which was late, I've got nothing to show for it. That perhaps my semblance might deceive the truth, that I to manhood am arrived so near. Yeah, and perhaps my semblance might deceive the truth, that I to manhood am arrived so near. You might think I look mature. And this is an and that I've seen in Shakespeare as well. This and can also mean but. Why he doesn't write but and does and? I'll have to think about that. That I to manhood am arrived so near, and inward ripeness doth much less appear. But inward ripeness, my inward ripeness, that's even less evident. That some more timely happy spirits endueth. One more time. That I to manhood am arrived so near, and inward ripeness doth much less appear. That some more timely happy spirits endueth, meaning other people, well, they're better put together than I am now, where they look as if they have ripened. Who says ripeness is all? Is it Hamlet or Lear? This idea of ripeness, of fulfillment. Meaning here, ripeness is not just that I got a new job and a promotion. Ripeness means I'm coming to my fruition. Yet be it less or more. I love this. See that here's the shift, right? Yet. What's happening before and after the yet? Yet it be less or more, or soon or slow. It shall be still in strictest measure, even to that same lot, however mean or high, towards which time leads me, and the will of heaven. All is, if I have grace to use it so, as ever in my great taskmaster's eye. Oh my God, what a great poem, right? Gotta get that heaven out of here, right? Excuse me. Wow. So just ponder together, ponder, what's going on in that yet. I mean, it's you have, in the first 8 lines, you have this image of time as destroyer. And then the perspective towards time completely changes. Yet, be it less or more, or soon or slow, whatever happens, it shall be. And we have to think about where that shall is coming from. Where is that imperative coming from? It shall be still in strictest measure even to that same lot, however mean or high, to that same fate, however mean or high, towards which time leads me. Here, however it happens, and whatever happens, a lot either mean or high, both of those are a function of a time that brings things to fruition. It's interesting. In the first 8 lines, we have there is time as a destroyer, and inward ripeness is not appearing. Here, Milton, or the poet here, seems to be saying, whatever happens, I will ripen in the way that time leads. Time will lead me to my. I keep on wanting to avoid this, but I'll say it. Time leads me to my destiny, whatever that is. Yet, be it less or more, or soon or slow, it shall be in strictest measure, even to that same lot, however mean or high, towards which time leads me, comma, if you had any doubt, and the will of heaven. Meaning, not just time in a classical sense, and Milton's always flirting with the classical notion of time, but time in the Christian sense, toward which time leads me, and the will of heaven. All is, again, you have to pause on that. What is that doing there? All is, meaning all of the potential of who I can be, it already exists. We'll see maybe in Augustine the way there's an understanding that from a divine perspective, past, present, and future are not meaningful. That's from St. Augustine, right? And Milton is using that conception of time. It's already happened. And here you just see how Milton just always changing, right? All is, and then the conditional. If I have grace to use it so, which simultaneously implies a kind of free will, right? But also grace, which kind of works against free will. All is, if I have grace to use it so. There's the active part. The grace is if heaven will help me lead to heaven. All is, if I have grace to use it so, as ever in my great taskmaster's eye. And it all already is present and exists as ever in my great taskmaster's eye. It exists already there, but the master, God, is giving me a task. So the 2 major things here. First of all, you see already in Milton, what we'll see very frequently is the simultaneous belief in providence, that God is going to cause everything, and the belief that man has a task. And we saw that in other parts of the poem as well. Even though it shall be, Milton wants the grace to use it so, to be active. The other thing that we saw here, and this is the primary thing, and especially for the Nativity Ode, are the 2 conceptions of time. One is where time is a destroyer. Love is like a flower which nature will devour, conventional notions of natural time. And the other is an idea where everything's already happened. And from the perspective where everything has already happened, the uncertainty of the first 8 lines makes no difference. But the greatness of Milton as a poet is at the same time that we get the certainty and surety of all is, at the same time we get that, we also get this sense of struggle. And he never compromises on the latter in favor of the former, which is why he's a great religious poet. So you can see my family household is now filling up, and I'm not going to continue, so you'll hear any more of, so far it's been very calm. So I will leave you with this, and tomorrow hopefully I'll post something else. I was recording.